Hello and welcome to the Shakespeare podcast. In this episode we'll be looking at some of the male characters in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and asking the question, whose play is it anyway? Imagine you're an actor and you want to play the leading part in a play. Unfortunately, that play is Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. If you could pick any role, which one would be the lead role? Maybe the leading role is that of Julius Caesar himself. The play is named after him, and he's famous and a great man, in the way history is sometimes said to be made up of great men. And his assassination is perhaps the centrepiece of the play. Or maybe the lead actor is Antony. He takes charge after Caesar's murder, and he has that big speech in the middle of Act 3. What actor wouldn't want to get his teeth into the Friends, Romans, Countrymen speech? It's one of the best speeches Shakespeare ever wrote, and it's central to the play's theme that words matter, that language is power. But wait a minute, isn't the real central character Brutus? Brutus is the one who must struggle with his conscience before joining the conspiracy. It's Brutus's idealism which is recognised even by Antony and Octavius at the end of the play. And perhaps most importantly for any actor, Brutus has more lines than any other character in the play. The confusion over who the lead character is in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar stems from a simple fact. I told you in an earlier podcast that the story of Julius Caesar's murder was not the story of Shakespeare's play. That's because Shakespeare's Julius Caesar is not a play at all. It's two plays happening at the same time. Now, if you've been taught one version of the play, you probably won't see the other play that's happening at the same time. I told you Shakespeare was good at writing plays. Let's take the version that I'm going to call the Imperial version of Julius Caesar. This is the story of a great Roman general called Julius Caesar who is horribly murdered, cut down in the prime of life by a bunch of envious lowlives who pretended to be his friends and supporters. Fortunately, Antony, through the sheer force of his oratory, gets the general public to realise what a heinous crime has been committed, forcing the murderers to flee Rome as fugitives. Antony, with the help of Julius Caesar's nephew Octavius, is able to track down the traitors, defeat them in battle, which is only right because their cause is just, and exact revenge on these traitors for the murder of such a noble and famous general who was the epitome of Roman greatness. In this version, Antony is the hero who vanquishes the traitors and restores order to Rome. If this is the play you've been studying, you've probably missed the other play that was taking place at the same time. Let's call this version the revolutionary version. This is the story of an arrogant tyrant called Julius Caesar, who returns to Rome as a conquering general, fully expecting to overthrow the democratic Republic of Rome and install himself as king. The only hope for Rome and the Senate is a few courageous and idealistic revolutionaries who hatch a plan to kill the tyrant and save Rome. Although their plan to kill Caesar is successful, the wider revolution fails to materialise and the situation descends into civil war. The revolutionaries argue amongst themselves as they are faced with the forces of authoritarianism. Ultimately, the revolution fails and the heroes of the revolution are slain. In this version of the play, Brutus is clearly the hero. His idealism is what brings the revolutionaries together and brings the revolution to fruition. His unwavering sense of honour and duty, even in the face of death, is the shining virtue and moral of the play. In this version of the play, the most important question is, why did the revolution fail? And that's what Julius Caesar is about. It's a cautionary tale for revolutionaries everywhere. So, With these two versions in mind, let's look at some of the questions surrounding these male characters. Julius Caesar, great Roman leader or tyrant? Antony, friend of Caesar who gets revenge for his murder, or the new face of authoritarianism? Brutus, naive senator dragged into a conspiracy he didn't think through, or hero of the revolution? Well, let's look at those different assertions. We first encounter Caesar in Act 1, Scene 2. He enters with a flourish and a whole group of people and calls for his wife Calphurnia. Casca's "Peace, ho, Caesar speaks" is as much directed at the audience as it is to the other actors. Caesar is about to speak, so be quiet and listen. Caesar then issues orders to Calphurnia and his friend Antony, which are immediately obeyed. As Antony puts it, quote, "When Caesar says do this, it is performed." So our first impression is that Caesar thinks he's very important, and so does everyone else. Notice that Caesar refers to himself in the third person. That is to say, that Caesar refers to himself as Caesar. As he says, Caesar's turn to hear. So Caesar calls himself Caesar, as important people sometimes do. And it's the soothsayer who comes forward to tell Caesar to, quote, "beware the Ides of March." As an aside here, we might note the irony that it's Brutus and Cassius who bring the soothsayer forward to give Caesar the warning. Caesar dismisses the soothsayer as a dreamer and walks out. We, the audience, know that Caesar should take the soothsayer more seriously. But he doesn't. The soothsayer will give Caesar a warning 3 times during the play. The last is on the Capitol, minutes before he's murdered. Caesar says to the soothsayer, "The Ides of March are come," indicating that the soothsayer's prophecy was untrue. And the soothsayer says back to Caesar, "The day's not over yet, bro." I'm paraphrasing here. But what are we to make of this? Is Caesar being arrogant or stupid or both? Well, as with that scene where Metellus and Brutus and Cassius and Cinna and Decius are all kneeling before Caesar, just before they kill him, it's not a great look, is it? Caesar may be arrogant and stupid or not, but he's not a sympathetic character. He's a great general, but in Act 2, Scene 2, he seems unable to make up his own mind as to whether he should stay at home or not. The real question is whether Caesar would have become king. The revolutionaries certainly think so. And there is the incident at the games where Antony offers Caesar a crown and he refuses it 3 times. We, the audience, don't see this incident, but we hear about it from Casca, who says the whole thing was, quote, "mere foolery." And as far as Casca is concerned, Caesar refusing the crown is a piece of political theatre to try and get the public used to the idea of him being king. Later, in Act 3, Antony uses the exact same event to show that Caesar really didn't want to be king. In his speech to the Forum, Antony says that everyone saw Caesar being offered the crown, quote, "which he did thrice refuse." Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? Which brings us to Antony, Caesar's friend, and a man with a reputation both as a soldier and a party animal. We know that Antony is great at public speaking because he has that great speech in Act 3. But do we believe what he has to say, even though it's said very well? Do we believe that Caesar didn't want to be king, or that he wasn't a threat to the Republic of Rome? Later, in the same speech, Antony tells us that Brutus's betrayal was the thing that killed Caesar. Quote, "ingratitude more strong than traitor's arms, quite vanquished him, then burst his mighty heart." So it was the ingratitude that killed Caesar, not the multiple stab wounds. I say this not to be flippant, but so that students of Shakespeare might not be lured into thinking favourably of Caesar by Antony's rhetoric, just as the crowd in the Forum is. Another side of Antony is to be found in Act 4, Scene 1, when Antony, Octavius and Lepidus are compiling a kill list of people to be executed. There's no emotion here, no inner turmoil, just another day at the office. And if that were not damning enough, after Lepidus exits, Antony's already planning to get rid of him. Octavius says to Antony of Lepidus, quote, "He's a tried and valiant soldier." And Antony replies, "So is my horse." Wow, is this guy cold? Whatever else you want to say about Antony, Shakespeare does not go out of his way to make him a sympathetic character. Which brings us to Brutus, because Shakespeare does go out of his way to make Brutus a sympathetic character. Act 2 opens with Brutus in his garden, calling for his servant to put a light in his study because he can't sleep. Unlike all the other conspirators, Brutus is uncertain what he should do. There's an inner struggle here. We see no such inner struggle with Cassius or Casca. Brutus is the one who is given time alone to consider his position. At the end of Act 2, Scene 1, Brutus's conversation with Portia shows that although he has conspired to assassinate Caesar and start a revolution, he's not confident enough to share it with his wife. Brutus is not boastful or vulgar. The weight of the decision affects him. Brutus himself tells us how difficult his position is. Quote, "The state of man, like to a little kingdom, suffers then the nature of an insurrection." At the end of Act 4, Scene 2, Brutus has another moment, this time with Lucius. When Lucius sings him a song and Brutus tries to read his book, and the ghost appears to Brutus, and Brutus seems resigned to his fate, like a good Roman should be. See how well he treats people, how well he treats servants and his colleagues, and his pledge to Lucius, quote, "If I do live, I will be good to thee." So here is Shakespeare going out of his way to show that Brutus is a sympathetic character. If Brutus has a flaw, it is that he's too idealistic, and he assumes that everyone around him is as idealistic as he is. His argument with Cassius is about money. His insistence that Caesar shall die but no one else must die has fatal consequences, not just for Brutus but for everyone around him. Brutus's death comes right at the end of the play. It's the end of our story. And it's given to Antony to have the final verdict on Brutus when he says, quote, "This was the noblest Roman of them all." Now, that might lead us to think that Brutus would be the hero of this play, but it's more complicated than that. Shakespeare is able to write two plays at the same time because he's aware of the ambiguity of political discourse. It's an ambiguity that still exists today. Brutus is a hero of the revolution. He's also a traitor. Perhaps today, Brutus and Cassius would be labelled, quote, "domestic terrorists," because one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. And when the people rise up so that their voice can be heard, is that a grassroots movement or mob rule? What's the difference between mob rule and a grassroots movement? Well, it depends where you're standing when you make the judgment and label the event. If you're in a position of authority, a popular uprising is mob rule. If you're a plebeian and a member of the lumpen proletariat, it's a grassroots movement. If this seems a long way from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, it really isn't. Shakespeare's play is all about political judgment and political labels that still affect us today. Of course, there is another way of looking at all this, a third way between the imperial and the revolutionary versions of the play. And that is, if Julius Caesar is a play about a failed revolution and Brutus is the hero of that failed revolution, well, the revolutionaries are not very competent. This revolution is doomed from the start. Cassius and Brutus and the rest of them don't seem to have a coherent strategy for Rome's future after the assassination of Julius Caesar. It's almost as if they expect Rome will just go back to being the republic they imagined it was in the past. In fact, what Brutus and the rest achieve by assassinating Julius Caesar is to create a power vacuum at the top of the Roman hierarchy, a power vacuum that Antony and Octavius step into without too much effort. This reading of the play does not cast Brutus as the hero, but rather a naive politician who thinks the conspiracy and its aftermath can survive on his idealism alone. Over and above these considerations, Shakespeare seems to be telling us to remember that the poor people, quote unquote, the plebeians, have real power in these situations, whether they know it or not. The problem is that the carpenter and the cobbler from Act 1 will cheer for Pompey at one moment and then cheer for Caesar at the next moment. That the crowd in the forum in Act 3, they'll call Brutus noble one minute and call for his house to be burned down the next. Ultimately, Shakespeare seems to be suggesting that the general public is fickle and shallow, and that political consensus can change on a whim and an instant. Oh, that Mr. William Shakespeare, where does he get his ideas from? I hope you've enjoyed this episode and that it's given you some insight into Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. And we will see you next time, I'm sure, on the Shakespeare podcast.